Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth with your host, the Green Bard. This is Dany's Dragon Bonds, Volume 4, Part 2, War and Peace, Dragons Chained. This episode is the only one of the series with no dragon interactions, only discussions of the dragon theme of power. Her story in this volume really is a tug-of-war between war and peace, savagery and healing. A special shout-out goes to the writers of The Meereenese Blot, who have a tremendous essay on this theme. Dany is trying to make Meereen a peaceful state, while hiding from the savagery and power of her dragons, trying to forget that they are a part of her. Throughout, it becomes more and more evident that this isn't working, even as her actions culminate in her marriage to Hizdahr Loraq. Intertwined is her lust for Daario Naharis, whose violent demeanor stands in for the savagery of dragons. Can Dany be both mother to dragons and mother to her people? A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 3. The discussion with Xaro, Xhoan, and Daxos about the dragons and the implications of their disappearance calls back to the theme of their value and power from A Clash of Kings. There are also 5 mentions of her as a dragon, mother of dragons, or Valyrians as dragons. The dragon mentions in the conversation with Xaro lead to the point that in Qarth he lusted for one, but now having seen what they wrought in Astapor, he now just wants them gone from his corner of the world. It starts with Dany's inner monologue. "I was a beggar queen, and you were Xaro of the 13, Dany thought, and all you wanted were my dragons." Xaro then makes his aims clear in the subsequent dialogue. "A fleet. It was more than she could hope for. So of course it made her wary. In Qarth, Xaro had offered her 30 ships for a dragon. And what price do you ask for these ships? None. I no longer lust for dragons. I saw their work at Astapor on my way here, when my silken cloud put in for water. The ships are yours, sweet queen. 13 galleys, and men to pull the oars." Later. "Inspect all you wish. When you are satisfied, swear to me that you shall return to Westeros forthwith, and the ships are yours. Swear by your dragons and your 7-faced god and the ashes of your fathers, and go." She attempts to project power, but since the dragons are not evident, the threat is not very well supported. He was wrong in that, she hoped. The freedmen had been a rabble once, but she had organized the men of fighting age into companies and commanded Grey Worm to make them into soldiers. Let him think what he will. Have you forgotten? I have dragons. Do you? In Qarth, you were seldom seen without a dragon on your shoulder. Yet now that shapely shoulder is as fair and bare as your sweet breast, I observe. My dragons have grown, my shoulders have not. They range far afield, hunting. Hosea, forgive me. She wondered how much Xaro knew, what whispers he had heard. Ask the good masters of Astapor about my dragons if you doubt them. I saw a slaver's eyes melt and go running down his cheeks. Tell me true, old friend, why did you seek me out, if not to trade? At one point in the conversation, she does think of Drogon, and I believe the passage is a sign that their bond is still holding. I feel this is an instance of sharing senses. I think it is also an indication that he hears her thoughts still, bringing himself close to her mind when she thinks of him. If I were a dragon, I could fly to Westeros, she thought when he was gone. I would have no need of Xaro or his ships. Dany wondered how many men 13 galleys could hold. It had taken 3 to carry her and her Khalasar from Qarth to Astapor, but that was before she had acquired 8,000 Unsullied, 1,000 sellswords, and a vast horde of freedmen. And the dragons, what am I to do with them? Drogon, she whispered softly, where are you? For a moment she could almost see him sweeping across the sky, his black wings swallowing the stars. The last dragon mentioned in their conversation brings a chilling note. Pro tip, Xaro, threatening the mother of dragons is not good for your health. When your dragons were small, they were a wonder. Grown, they are death and devastation, a flaming sword above the world. He wiped away the tears. I should have slain you in Qarth. While Dany refrains from killing him then and there, it makes her goal of being a peaceful ruler that much less attainable. A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 4. The dichotomy between being savage and peaceful is illustrated in her choice between Daario and Hizdahr as suitors. Hizdahr represents peace, but also a compromise of her morals and her self-image, a compromise with slavers. Daario represents violence, but also freedom to be what she wants. Where she strikes the balance is a metaphor for her own fate. In the rest of the volume, she tries to enjoy the freedom she feels from being with Daario, while trying to wed herself to Hizdahr. In the dialogue where she is urged by the Green Grace to wed Hizdahr, there are many instances of dragon symbolism, colorful language intended to inspire joining of harpy and dragon together in peace and glory. There are also savage aspects to the conversation, hinting at the violence inherent to her current rule and to her dragons. The priestess did not smile. The shave pate would feed them to your dragons, it is said. A life for a life. For every brazen beast cut down, he would have a child die. The subsequent meeting with Daario continues the violence theme, but he portrays it as a good thing. 9, said Daario, but a dozen of the long lances decided they would sooner be stormcrows than corpses, so we came out 3 ahead. I told them that they would live longer fighting with your dragons than against them, and they saw the wisdom in my words. Later, Daario tossed away the pear stem. Qartheen have milk in their veins. Let them see your dragons, and they'll run. In the following second-hand account about her dragons, we see that there is no diminishing of their savagery. Dany did not want to talk about the dragons. Farmers still came to her court with burnt bones, complaining of missing sheep, though Drogon had not returned to the city. Some reported seeing him north of the river, above the grass of the Dothraki Sea. Down in the pit, Viserion had snapped one of her chains, and he and Rhaegal grew more savage every day. Once the iron doors had glowed red-hot, her Unsullied told her, and no one dared to touch them for a day. Astapor is under siege as well. She is reminded in that last quote that despite wanting to close her eyes to it, people are dying because of her decisions, the Astapori, and more will as time goes on unless she course corrects. Even while thinking of Drogon and her chained dragons, Dany is still rejecting them, and so she also rejects Daario in his inherent violence. Viserys would have his head off for that insolence. I am the blood of the dragon. Do not presume to teach me lessons. When Dany stood, the lion pelt slipped from her shoulders and tumbled to the ground. Leave me. Her body betrayed her feelings, though, showing her nakedness to him even as she sends him away. Thing is, she needed his lesson. It could help for her to face the truth, but instead, she is fearful and wallowing in it. Still, she knows the dragons cannot be caged forever, and she worries that nobody knows where Drogon is. It is tearing her up. What have I done, she thought, huddled in her empty bed. I had waited so long for him to come back, and I send him away. He would make a monster of me, she whispered, a butcher queen. But then she thought of Drogon far away, and the dragons in the pit. There is blood on my hands, too, and on my heart. We are not so different, Daario and I. We are both monsters. I wonder about the blood on my heart implication. Is she considering Drogon to be her heart here? She does seem to see what Daario is, and she tries to reject the path of violence herself, but the decisions coming in front of her are very difficult. Clearly she does not want to be a monster. Will that be enough? In my humble opinion, it will not be enough if she continues to hide from the truth. A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 5. In this chapter, she continues to reject the violence of use of the dragons in war, but this is now self-destructive because she needs to defend herself. It starts with her rejection of Grolio's advice. Her admiral's counsel had proved worse than useless. Let them see your dragons, Grolio said. Let the Yunkishmen have a taste of fire, and the trade will flow again. Those ships are strangling us, and all my admiral can do is talk of dragons, Dany said. You're my admiral, are you not? Later. Aye, and I've told you what. These ships are made of rope and pitch and canvas, of Cahork pine and teak from Sothoros, old oak from great Norvos, yew and ash and spruce, wood, your grace, Wood burns. The dragons. I will hear no more about my dragons. Leave me. Go pray to your Pentoshi gods for a storm to sink our foes. The futility of this approach is then foreshadowed by news of Astapor's defeat. The weaver raised her head. Every day we told each other that the Dragon Queen was coming back. The woman had thin lips and dull, dead eyes, set in a pitched and narrow face. Cleon had sent for you, it was said, and you were coming. Later. Even then some said you were coming, said the weaver. They swore they had seen you mounted on a dragon, flying high above the camps of the Yunkai. Every day we looked for you. Then she rejects the same advice from Brown Ben Plum, choosing instead the meekness of one of her perfumed seneschals. Them and dragons, said Brown Ben Plum with a grin. In the pit, in chains, wailed Reznak Mo Reznak. What good are dragons that cannot be controlled? Even the Unsullied grow fearful when they must open the doors to feed them. What are the queen's little pets? Brown Ben's eyes crinkled in amusement. The grizzled captain of the Second Sons was a creature of the Free Companies, a mongrel with the blood of a dozen different peoples flowing through his veins. But he had always been fond of the dragons, and them of him. Her refusal to employ the dragons in defense now loses Brown Ben and the Second Sons. We need them dragons, the way I see it. Dany sighed. I am sorry, Ben. I dare not loose the dragons. She could see that was not the answer he wanted. Plum scratched at his speckled whiskers. If there's no dragons in the balance, well, we should leave before them yonkish bastards close the trap. Only first, make the slavers pay to see our backs. She disregards that advice as well, which seals the loss of the Second Sons, at least until Quentyn looses the dragons instead. Though she doesn't realize Brown Ben's abandonment of her cause yet, she still sees the walls closing in, and she worries for her people. Dany looked at him helplessly. It was good that dragons did not cry. As you say, then, we will keep them outside the walls until this curse has run its course. Set up a camp for them beside the river, west of the city. Sir Barristan paints her predicament in stark words. Men can always fight, your grace. Ask rather if we can win. You have 2 dragons who cannot be controlled, and a third that may be lost to you. Her rejection of the violence of her dragons and her dragon nature has created a mess for her. Will her peaceful aims be feasible with diplomacy instead? A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 6. This chapter continues the dichotomy between the violence of her savage dragon identity, tied to the brutality of war as symbolized by Daario, and her wish for peace, and the capitulation that comes with it, symbolized by Hizdahr. This passage starts with her inner monologue, while under pressure from the Green Grace to wed Hizdahr. Get the heads of all the noble houses out of their pyramids on some pretext, Daario had said. The dragon's words are fire and blood. Dany pushed the thought aside. It was not worthy of her. As you wish, she sighed. I shall marry Hizdahr in the Temple of the Graces, wrapped in a white tokar, fringed with baby pearls. Is there anything else? We now get a brief mention of the magic of her king's blood, and the associated resistance to disease, which I believe to be tied to the magic of the bond. I am the blood of the dragon, Dany reminded him. Have you ever seen a dragon with the flux? Viserys had often claimed that Targaryens were untroubled by the pestilences that afflicted common men, and so far as she could tell, it was true. She could remember being cold and hungry and afraid, but never sick. This reminder of a Game of Thrones and the healing aspect of the bond, this while Drogon was still an egg, ought to remind Dany the dragons aren't all bad, but I don't think the lesson takes. That said, I'll probably cover the Targaryen resistance to disease in another post soon. Hizdahr then reminds Dany that her dragonish impulse to singe the Yunkai envoy's tokar using the Dracarys command was violent. Ah, there is the thorn in the bower, my queen, said Hizdahr zo Loraq. Sad to say, Yunkai has no faith in your promises. They keep plucking the same string on the harp about some envoy that your dragons set on fire. The realization that her inaction had lost her the Second Sons then hits her hard, with some mention of the affinity the dragons had for Ben. Still, she wants to find peace through compromise and marrying Hizdahr. Even the dragons had been fond of old Brown Ben, who liked to boast that he had a drop of the dragon blood himself. 3 reasons you will know. Later. If I marry Hizdahr before the sun comes up, will all these armies melt away like morning dew and let me rule in peace? She can't fully commit to that course of peace, though, as she simultaneously falls into Daario's arms. His hair smelled of blood and smoke and horse, and his mouth was hard and hot on hers. Dany trembled in his arms. When they broke apart, she said, "I thought you would be the one to betray me. Once for blood, and once for gold, and once for love," the warlock said. I never thought Brown Ben. Even my dragons seemed to trust him." She clutched her captain by the shoulders. "Promise me that you will never turn against me. I could not bear that. Promise me." Later. 100? Daario chuckled through his purple beard. "I lied, sweet queen. It was 1,000, but never once a dragon." Will she remain a dragon, though? A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 7. This chapter has only a couple dragon identity mentions, followed by her contemplating that identity and a riddle from the House of the Undying visions on the eve of her wedding. The sun's son. A shiver went through her, shadows and whispers. What else had Quaithe said? The pale mare and the sun's son. There was a lion in it, too. And a dragon. Or am I the dragon? Beware the perfumed seneschal. That she remembered. Dreams and prophecies. Why must they always be in riddles? I hate this. Oh, leave me, sir. Tomorrow is my wedding day. It is fitting that she contemplates whether she is the dragon in that passage, given her coming rejection of the symbol of their violence, Daario. A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 8. In hopes of her choice to marry Hizdahr bringing peace, she sends Daario to the Yunkai as a hostage on her wedding day, along with Grolio. Hizdahr's cooks prepared dog 4 different ways. Giscari men will eat anything that swims or flies or crawls, but for man and dragon, Daario had warned her. And I'd wager they'd eat dragon too if given half a chance. Daario, of course, knows that the Giscari are also savage, as evidenced by that passage. With Grolio and Daario gone, though, and Brown Ben having turned his cloak, all those who were advising her to use her dragons are no longer at her side, save brief encounters like the following. I told you once, there are old sellswords and there are bold sellswords, but there are no old, bold sellswords. My boys didn't care to die, that's all, and when I told them that you couldn't unleash them dragons against the Yunkish men, well... That's, of course, her speaking to Brown Ben at the wedding. Speaking of the sun's son, which we mentioned in the last chapter, at this point, Dany takes Quentyn Martell beneath the pyramid to see the dragons. I'll cover this later. After Quentyn, we'll return to Dany and the reunification with Drogon at the fighting pit, where her dream of peace crumbles. Having quit the city on the dragon's back, she then has time to contemplate her choices in this volume. Magically, that will be the conclusion of this series until we get the Winds of Winter. Or perhaps I'll cover some sample chapters. See you next time. Thanks to all the terrific artists whose work is featured on this video. Thanks especially to those in my family who helped in this series so far. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.